Hello and welcome to this week's Genuine Learning blog. My name is Alex Romero from Golasso Learning Solutions. This week we are going to be focusing on something that's really near and dear to my heart, governmental accounting, specifically public sector current landscape and future recommendations. In October 2024, the AICPA and the NASDAQ released a joint report focusing on public sector CPA resources, the current landscape, and those recommendations for the future. Now, why are we looking at this? Why is this something of concern? Well, governmental entities really need to have that strong accounting, auditing, and finance function to have that accountability for their citizens and their community alike. And they also need to ensure that they are able to engage qualified CPA firms to go ahead and conduct these external audits. Now, one of the things that Mark Cozil did when he was first starting out in his first 6 months as the CEO of the AICPA was put out a call to all the members and say, what are you concerned with? What are some of your top areas that we need to be looking in? They had 5 different themes that came in, and one of those was governmental accounting and the public sector and not having enough people that are qualified in this area, both on the industry side within the governmental entities and on the CPA side, really conducting these different engagements. So there was a joint working group that was put together, and it included key stakeholders that were going to be looking at different questions to really understand what are the challenges that we are facing in this area, but also what can we do? What are some of our opportunities that we can really employ to hire and retain CPAs in this public sector? They first started out, those key stakeholders, by gathering information before they looked at what the insights and the recommendations were going to be. They held 6 different discussion forums, and from that, they issued and had 900 surveys come back. We did see a pretty evenly split between who responded to these surveys. We had 52% that came from the governmental entities, so within the business and industry, and then we had 48% that were coming from CPA firms. Within that bucket, looking at those that are in the governmental entity side, there was about 47% that came from our local government, 27 from our state, and then it kind of dwindled down from there, looking at school district, higher ed, special district, and so forth. So what are some of the key elements that we saw in the survey data? Well, one of the areas that I wanted to focus on, because I felt this specifically when I was in business industry working in the governmental sector, was how many governmental entities have 1 or fewer, meaning 0, CPAs that are part of their teams. We had it so that 63% of local governments only have 1 or 0 CPAs on their finance teams. I can attest to this. I was 1 CPA in a team of 28 on our finance department that had a CPA. When I was part of a special district, a library district, uniquely, we actually had 2 CPAs. So when I was first hired, there was a CPA that was in the CFO role that hired me. And then as that individual, she was promoted to the executive director of the library, and I moved into that CFO role. So we had 2 of the highest positions within the entity having CPAs. That's very unique because our finance team was only 4 individuals. It's more likely what we saw when I was in a local jurisdiction when I was 1 of 28 that had a CPA. So how can we go about really retaining and hiring CPAs? That was the question that was proposed to the governmental entities. And what they really noticed is that having those signing bonuses, maybe increasing the salaries, providing compensation for CPA exams was going to be something that was going to have either an effect, a very effective, down to a somewhat effective in really hiring and retaining those individuals. I will say though, being from the inside and knowing kind of that side of this industry, having the government pay for CPA examinations is going to be a little difficult to really talk about the value proposition there. But that is something that we need to do with those elected officials and those that are going to be really approving and appropriating the budgets for our different organizations and our governmental entities. Then we're going to be looking at what do CPAs that are currently working in the governmental entities really think is most important. These aren't surprising, but they are items that maybe we should highlight more to really draw more individuals into this side of public sector finance, is the compensation. Now, a lot of times it's not going to be as high as maybe in a public accounting firm, but a lot of them do have really nice compensation packages that do include the second item on here, the benefits, retirement plans. A lot of them still have defined contribution benefit plans. So that is something that if you want to be looking about what you're going to do in the future into retirement, a lot of different governmental entities do have a pretty nice package here. You have that work-life balance a lot of times, and this is almost something I don't want to say is coming from the government, but there is that stereotype, and it is true that you're not going to be working those long hours. A lot of times, once it hits 5 o'clock, 5:30, everybody leaves. We aren't going to be staying there till 9 or 10, which you might see on the public accounting side. You can have a long career path here. So here are some of those different things that are really going to encourage CPAs specifically to want to look at working for a local government, a state government, and so forth. We also see on the CPA firm side, though, that a lot of them are really kind of holding back and getting out of this game doing governmental audits because there's not that much profit margin there and there's a lot of costs associated. So many times governments are going to be focusing on getting that lowest bid, picking that audit firm that's going to be bringing in that low bid. And so then it makes it so maybe some of those more qualified firms aren't going to submit bids because they know they're going to be outbid. So why even put it in? And they don't want to devalue their work so low that they aren't going to be making a profit, because unfortunately, a lot of times the client's not prepared because you don't have people on staff that understand governmental accounting. You don't have CPAs. So a lot of times the auditors come in and the government's just not ready to be audited. They also have it so that they don't have finance team members that know about the different GASB implementations, all these different key components that need to be completed before the auditors walk in the door. And it also is difficult sometimes to get people motivated on the CPA firm side to really look at this as an area that they want to grow and stay in. So what are some of these key insights and recommendations that we saw out of this report? One of the top ones was that CPAs aren't always valued in the public sector government. And that is really the root cause to many of the challenges that we see in public finance. And that also they aren't valuing the CPA firms that are doing the work. So what can we do? Well, we need to really focus on getting more qualified and better credentialed staff in the governmental entities. We also need to be paying them appropriately. And we need to really view that external audit as something that's going to be adding value. It's not something that we want to have the lowest bid, that we want to make sure that we aren't spending a lot of dollars. We need to look at it as something that's going to be bringing value to our community. Our second insight is that we have a lot of constraints and resource constraints within the government, and so it makes it challenging to offer those competitive salaries and to really have that training. So by looking at and really speaking to our legislative bodies and those government officials and talking about how we need to have more funds in this area, maybe we can look at different grants, different programs that could be reimbursement to really drive in those dollars to be able to have that competitive salary and to have our CPA firms paid equitably when they're doing this work. We also see that a lot of technical expertise is needed in this governmental work, and that it's difficult to find that both on the industry side and in the CPA firm side. So what's our recommendations here? We'll offer some of that training and those upskilling opportunities, and maybe look at some of the standard setters and see if there's a way that we can maybe limit some of those standards on maybe a smaller size government. Even though a government might be very small and just have one fund and not a lot of resources, they still have all these requirements that are going to be the same as these large governments. So is there something we can look at there to make the burden a little bit less so that we get individuals that are going to be qualified to do that work and then audit it? We also see that there is need for improvements for policies and procedures, and looking at what are we doing to really hire and retain, and also how are we introducing governmental accounting. A lot of us only saw this when we were taking our CPA exam for the first time, but this should be something that is introduced earlier on in our education system. We also need to maybe have a better process when we're hiring, especially within the governmental entity, that it's not going to be this long drawn out process that people get discouraged and they don't want to do and they don't want to partake in. Our last insight here is maybe emphasizing looking at doing a focus on governmental audits. So within the CPA firms, talking about what the potential is in this area, that this could be a really great career path for them, and encourage them to get into the government practice and have that importance that built in, that you're talking about how important it is to do this work, to be providing for our community, that we're going to be giving back to the community because we're going to be supplying them with the information so that they know that the tax dollars that they are spending are going towards the programs and initiatives to really better their community, and really allowing those staff members to focus in on government work year round rather than just having it thrown in on top of everything else that's on their plate. So what are our key takeaways from this? Well, our report is showing that we need to value CPAs in the public sector. We need to recognize that CPAs as that are going to be strategic assets, that they are not going to be commodities, and we need to be offering competitive pay and emphasizing their value and the value of those audits. We need to address the funding and resource gaps. We need to advocate for legislation and budgetary support to really strengthen our governmental finance teams and fairly engage CPA firms. We want to reduce those technical barriers, so provide that targeted training, upskilling, and standard alignment to attract and retain that talent that we so desperately need. We need to strengthen our policies and our pipeline, so improve those recruitment, the hiring, those processes, the audit engagement process, while introducing students to the public sector much earlier in their governmental and their accounting teachings, their accounting studies. That's the word I was trying to look for. And last, we also want to be promoting that governmental audit career, talking about what it can mean to somebody that's a CPA, how you could really highlight the rewards of public service, and allowing people to really focus on it year round. So thank you so much for joining me as we looked at the public sector, both on the industry side and the CPA firm side, to really hone in and address the pipeline issues and what we can do to really better address these, and some recommendations we can look at to really strengthen this area. We do have the full report that came from the AICPA and the NASACT in our comments below, so you can take a look at all the different recommendations and a lot of that data that came out of the survey, which is really beneficial to have a full understanding of what is going on in this area. So thank you very much for joining me this week.